Mahood, page 247. Serbia to Hungary, 2015, 15 to 16 days from home. Mahood stared at the gun pointed at him. Was this real, or was he still asleep, or having a nightmare? The Serbian taxi driver waved a pistol at Mahood's family. You pay 300 euros, he demanded. This wasn't a dream. It was real. Mahood had been groggy just seconds before, but now he was wide awake, his heart hammering. His eyes felt dry, even though his shirt still clung to him with sleep sweat, and he blinked rapidly and he looked at his parents. They were already awake, his father hugging the still sleeping Walid protectively. Don't shoot, please, Mahood's father said. He threw one of his arms protectively across Mahood and his mother. 300 euros, the taxi driver said. 300 euros! That was more than twice what they had agreed to pay the driver. Please, Dad begged. You not die, you pay 300, the taxi driver yelled. His arm shook and the gun danced between the two front seats. Mahood's mother closed her eyes and shrank away. Mahood's father threw up his hand. We'll pay! They were being held at gunpoint in the middle of nowhere in a foreign country. What else could he do? Mahood's heart thundered in his chest, and his father handed Walid to Mom and fumbled with the money hidden inside his shirt under his belt. Mahood wanted to do something, to stop this man from threatening his family, but what could he do? Mahood was helpless, and that made him even madder. With shaking hands, Mahood's father counted out 300 euros and shoved them at the taxi driver. Why he didn't demand the whole stash of money? Mahood didn't understand. You get out! Get out! The taxi driver said. Mahood and his family didn't have to be told twice. They threw open the car doors and scrambled outside, and before the doors were even fully closed again, the Volkswagen tore off down the dark road, its red taillights disappearing around the curve. Mahood trembled with anger and fear, and his mother shook with quiet sobs. Mahood's father pulled them all into a hug. Well, Mahood's father said at last, I'm definitely giving that driver a bad review on TripAdvisor. Mahood's quivering legs gave out and he sank to the ground. Tears streamed down his face, and as though they'd been held back by a dam before now and the floodgates had suddenly been opened. He had a gun pointed right at his face. As long as he lived, Mahood would never forget that feeling of paralyzing terror or powerlessness. His mother sat down in the road with him and hugged him. Mahood's tears came harder, fueled by everything they had come before. The bombing of their house, the attack on their car, struggling to live in Izmir, the long hours in sea, and of course, Hana. Mostly Hana. I'm so sorry, Mom, Mahood blubbered. I am so sorry I made you give Hana away. His mother stroked Mahood's hair and shook her head. No, my beautiful boy, if the boat hadn't come along when it did, if you wouldn't have convinced them to take her, she would have drowned. I couldn't keep us above water. You saved her. I know you did. She's out there somewhere. We just have to find her. Mahood nodded at his mother's shoulder. I'll find her, Mom. I'll promise. Mahood and his mother cried and held each other until Mahood remembered they weren't getting any closer to Hana or to Germany. He dragged a sleeve across his wet mouth and nose, and his mother kissed him on the forehead. That thief took us about halfway to Hungary, at least, Mahood's father said, looking at his phone. We're on a back road about an hour's drive from the border. I think we're close to a bus stop. Means we have to walk again, though. Mahood helped his mother stand, and his father hefted Walid up higher on his shoulder. Mahood's little brother had slept through the whole thing. Mahood worried about his brother. Air raids, shootouts, taxi holdups, nothing seemed to faze him anymore. Was he just keeping all his tears and screams pent up inside, or he was becoming so used to horrible things happening all around him that he didn't even notice it anymore? Didn't care? Would he come to life again when they got to Germany? If they got to Germany? They made it to the bus stop, time to catch the bus to Hargos, a Serbian city at the Hungarian border. Even more Syrian refugees had collected there, but no one was getting through. Not by road or rail, or even out on the countryside the way Mahood and his family had crossed into Macedonia and Serbia. The Hungarians had a fence. It wasn't finished yet, but even now, at night, Hungarian soldiers were hard at work fencing 4 tall metal poles around the guard along the border and stretching chain-link fencing between them. Once the fence was hung, another group came behind them and attached 3 tiers of razor wire coil to it to keep people from climbing over. The Hungarians were closing their border. But we don't even want to go to Hungary, Mahood said. We just want to get through to Austria. The Hungarians don't care, I guess, Dad said. They don't want us in their country, whether we're coming or going. A group of refugees suddenly pushed a part of the unfinished fence, trying to get through before it was done. We're not terrorists, someone said. We're refugees. We just want to get through to Germany. They'll take us, someone cried. There were more shouts and screams, and before Mahood knew what was happening, he and his family were caught up in the press of refugees trying to get across the border. Mahood was jostled from every side. He clung to the back of his father's shirt, hanging on like Dad was a life preserver and they were going over a waterfall. As frightening as the stampede was, Mahood was excited too. The refugees were finally doing something. They weren't just disappearing into their tent cities. They were standing up and saying, "Here we are! Look at us! Help us!" But as the Hungarian soldiers weren't interested in helping. As the refugees stormed the border, soldiers in blue uniforms with red berets and red armbands hurried to stop them, firing tear gas canisters into the crowd. One of the canisters exploded near Mahood with a bang, and people screamed as gray-white cloud erupted around them. Mahood's eyes burned like someone had sprayed hot pepper juice in them, and mucus poured from his nose. He choked on the gas. His lungs seized up. He couldn't breathe. It's like he was drowning on land. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest and gasping uselessly for air. "I'm going to die," Mahood thought. "I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die." Joseph, somewhere on the Atlantic Ocean, 1939, 22 days from home, page 253. Joseph watched his sister splashing around happily in the swimming pool on A deck. Other kids chased each other around the promenade, watched movies, played shuffleboard. For as much as he wanted to grow up, Joseph wished now that he could join them, be a little kid again, cheerfully oblivious of what was going on around him. But he wasn't a kid anymore. He had responsibilities, like keeping his sister and his mother safe. Papa had told him what the concentration camps were like. He couldn't let that happen to Ruthie and his mother. "Are you ready?" It was Polsner. He stood in the shadow of a smokestack looking around nervously. Joseph nodded. He had agreed to help take over the ship. He had to do something. This was the only thing he could do. "What about Shindik and the firemen?" Joseph asked as they walked. "We got a distraction for them down on D deck, but we have to move fast." The rest of the group tamed together near the social hall. There were 10 men, including Joseph, and they all carried metal candlesticks and pieces of pipe. Some of the men were Papa's age, like Posner, and some of them were in their 20s. Joseph was by far the youngest. 10 men, Joseph thought. A minion. 10 Jews came together not to worship, but to mutiny. Posner put a small length of lead pipe in Joseph's hand, and suddenly the weight of what Joseph was about to do was very real. "Lead on," Posner said. Joseph took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. He led his fellow mutineers to the maze of crew corridors. Just outside the bridge, in the chart room where all the maps were stored, they came across Osmir, the first officer. He looked up from the map cabinet with a surprise, but before he could do anything, Posner and one of the other men grabbed him and pushed him through the door to the bridge. Joseph was startled how rough they were being with Osmir, but he tried to swallow his fear. Taking over the ship wasn't going to be easy, and this was only the start. There weren't as many people on the bridges as there had been when Joseph visited, just one officer and 3 sailors. The sailor at the ship's helm saw them first and let go of the steering wheel to dive for an alarm. One of the passengers got to him first, slamming into Helmsman and sending him tumbling to the floor. The mutineers quickly surrounded the other sailors, threatening them with their makeshift clubs, and they had done it. Just like that, they had taken the bridge. Joseph's heart raced as he looked around, wondering what was next. Stretched out before them was the great blue Atlantic Ocean, and beyond that, still days away, Germany and the Nazis. Up on the little platform at the back of the room, the steering wheel teetered back and forth, and Joseph wondered crazily if he should jump up there and turn the ship around himself. "Send for the captain," Posner told the first officer. Warily, Ostermeyer went to the ship's intercom and summoned Captain Schroeder to the bridge. As soon as Captain Schroeder stepped onto the bridge, he understood what was happening. He spun to leave, but Joseph and one of the other men blocked his exit. "Who's in charge here?" Captain Schroeder asked. "What do you mean by all this?" Posner stepped forward. "We mean to save our lives by taking over the ship," he said, "and sailing to any other country but Germany." Captain Schroeder put his hands behind his back and walked to the middle of the bridge. He looked at the ocean, not Posner. "The other passengers will not support you, and my crew will overpower you," he said matter-of-factly. "All you are doing is laying yourselves open to a charge of piracy." Posner and the others looked around at each other nervously. Joseph couldn't believe they were so easily losing their resolve. "We'll hold you here as hostages," Joseph said. "They'll have to do what we say." Even Joseph was surprised he'd spoken up, but his words seemed to put a little more steel back into the mutineers' resolve. Captain Schroeder looked to Joseph. "The crew will only obey by me," he said, "and I will give no order, no matter what you do, that you will take my ship off its set course, and without that order you can do nothing. What will you do, pilot the ship yourself?" Joseph blushed and stared to the ground, remembering his crazy urge to take the wheel when he didn't even know how it worked or where to go. Captain Schroeder helped his fallen helmsman back to his feet and led him to the steering wheel. The man was still shaking from the attack, but he took the helm and straightened the ship on course. "You have done enough already for me to to prefer serious charges against you, Captain Schroeder said, still frustratingly even-keeled. If I do, I can assure you that we will most certainly be taken back to Germany, and you know what that means. Joseph steamed. How did he know what it meant? But did Captain Schroeder really know? Really know? How many Germans really understand what was happening in the concentration camps? Joseph knew, because his papa had told him. He had shown him when he jumped overboard and tried to kill himself. Joseph wasn't about to let his mother and sister end up in one of those camps. You would do that to us? One of the men asked the captain. You're doing it to yourselves, Schroeder said. Listen, I understand and sympathize with your desperation. Posner huffed. You have no idea what any of us have been through. Any of us. Captain Schroeder nodded. No, you're right, but no matter what's been done to you, what you're doing now is a real criminal act. By law, I should have you thrown in the brig, but I'm willing to overlook all of this if you leave the bridge right now and give me your word, and you will know such take further action. Joseph scanned the faces of his co-conspirators and saw only panic, fear, surrender. No, Joseph told them. No, he told Captain Schroeder. My father told me what happened to him in those camps. I can't let that happen to my mother and my little sister. We can't go back to Germany. The first officer took that moment to try and pull free from the men holding him. There was a struggle. The other sailors moved to help him, and the other mutineers flinched, ready to fight. Ostermeyer, no! Captain Schroeder commanded. Seize and desist. This is an order. The first officer froze, and Posner froze too, the lead pipe still in his hand, raised to a threat. Nobody moved. The captain raised his hands. I promise you, men, he said quietly, his almost whisper, I promise you, on my honor, as a sea captain, that I will do everything possible to land you in England. I will run the ship around there if I must, but you must stand down and promise me no further trouble. Posner lowered his pipe. Agreed, he said. No, no! Joseph wanted to argue, but everyone else agreed. Joseph threw his pipe on the ground and left with the other men. They were going back to Europe, and there was nothing they could do about it.